Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi Yo Antaha Pravishya Pamavacha Imam Prashuptam Sanjeevayati Akhila Shakti Daraswadam Nanyam Shtahasta Charana Shravanatvagadim Pranam Namo Bhagavate Purushaya Tubhyam Lasatu Shrimadananda Tirtendurno Hridambare Yadvachaschandrika Swanta Santapam Vinikrantati Adavakya Pramanajnan Pranamya Shirasa Gurun Vyakarishye Yatabhutam Vishnu Tattva Vinirnayam. So good evening, good afternoon, and good morning for folks who have joined us from various parts. Today is the 11th session on Isha Upanishad. So where are we at this point? So we are in this very, very interesting and what I believe is a very important interface between various khandas within the Isha Upanishad. You could separate Isha Upanishad into 4 khandas. First khanda talking about the nature of the knowers of Brahman. The second khanda talking about the upasana of Brahman. The third khanda talking about the consequences of the wrong upasana. What is the correct approach to knowing Brahman? What are the problems or issues of knowing Brahman not properly? And in this context, Swayambhuva Manu is actually having a sakshatkara or darshana of Yajnanamaka Paramatma, and how he is contemplating and how he's describing that is the last 4 mantras of Isha Upanishad. So there's an interface here. So that is, we have completed 8th verse. And if I could remind you, we did the 8th verse about a couple of weeks ago. And we almost feels like we are stuck here. We are stuck at the tail end of the 8th verse because we are not able to move to the next section, because we need to understand the spirit in which Swayambhuva Manu is actually contemplating on the Brahman. We need to get into that Swayambhuva Manu's shoes. And that is one of the key messages of the Upanishads. We just don't read Upanishads because it's interesting. The characters that are there in the Upanishads, we need to start identifying with them. So if you can remember, when we did Chandogya Upanishad, we identified ourselves with Shvetaketu. And when we did Katha Upanishad, we identified ourselves as Nachiketa. Now, when we are doing Ishavasya Upanishad, we need to identify ourselves in Swayambhuva Manu's shoes and then understand the spirit and the philosophy that he is actually talking to us. So we need to look at the Upanishad and see what it is telling us, rather than preform our own hypothesis and find answers to our hypothesis in the Upanishads. That would be an entirely a problematic approach from a Vedic philosophy perspective. And it is in that background, we appear to be kind of stuck in this interface between the 8th verse and the 9th verse. So let me just go through the 8th verse again, because this is really, really important. And we've been doing it, as I said, for 3 weeks. And it is really important, the 8th verse, because in the 8th verse, Swayambhuva Manu is praying to Paramatma, Yajnanamaka Paramatma. He is praying to him with so many adjectives that he has given to Brahman. You are Anejadekam, you are Arshat, Tad ejati, you tad na ejati, tat dure, tat antike, tat antarasya sarvasya bahyataha. You are Shukram, you are Akayam, you are Avranam, you are Asnaviram, you are Kavihi, you are Manishi, you are Paribuhu, you are Swayambhuhu. And then he said, your created universe is amazing. Yata tatyato artan vyadadat shashvatibhyaha samabhyaha. So that's what he has said in the 8th verse. And that is not a passing by statement. It is a statement with huge, huge philosophical implications. Why? In all these verses that Swayambhuva Manu has praised the Yajnanamaka Paramatma, he has brought out the philosophy of omniscience of Paramatma, omnipotency, omnipresence, fearlessness. He is the supporter of all, and he has attributes, infinite attributes, and he has listed a few important attributes. Every word that he has said in the 8th verse of Isha Upanishad, they describe an attribute of Paramatma. It talks about an aspect that celebrates the greatness of Paramatma. Okay, so any serious student of philosophy is not going to miss this basic idea that Swayambhuva Manu is celebrating the great qualities of Paramatma. And from Vedic philosophical pursuit, we always understand Brahman as Gunapurna Doshadura. He is full of infinite auspicious attributes. He is without any defects, and he is the perfect being. Perfection is the embodiment of Brahman. Okay, so those are all key Vedic concepts of who this Supreme Lord is, and that is what Swayambhuva Manu has been making an attempt to do the upasana, and through that upasana, as documented by Kanva Rishi, we are able to understand this. Okay. Now the last word, the last line here is, he said, you are great, you are amazing, you are a perfect being, and I can understand that you're omniscient and you're omnipotent by the very fact that you've created this amazing universe. After giving all this description for our benefit, he also says we can grasp all these qualities of Brahman by just understanding this created universe in which we are doing our samsara. That this samsara is yata tatyato arthan vyadadat shashvatibhyaha samabhyaha. And we have looked at this line in great depth to understand the reality of the created universe. The creator of this universe creates a real universe, and this real universe is amazing. It's intricate, it's complicated, not just the Brahmanda, but also the Pindanda. So how beautiful must be the creator. Bahuchitra jagat bahuda karanat parashaktihi ananta gunaha paramaha, as Acharya says in Dvadasha Stotra, which is so true, because this world is big. And we understand when we do the science about this world, we understand how great must be the creator. So these are all the ideas that are compressed in the 8th verse. And more we think about it, the more we deliberate upon it, the deeper levels of philosophy that we go into. But then here is the problem. Before we move to the next verse, we need to understand that there are different views. There appears to be other views about Brahman, about the created universe. Yeah, and we need to be aware of that so that we do our manana and then we follow the right direction. Because as I've told you so many times, this is our career as souls. It is not some dry, empirical, philosophical speculation. This is our career of souls, and we need to be very, very careful with regards to how we make the journey. If we take the wrong left turn, we are going to go to an entirely different destination. So this is the challenge. And as you know, in Katha Upanishad, Yama has said, the followers of Sanatana Dharma, the followers of Vedic philosophy, they're actually walking on a razor's edge. It is really a difficult razor's edge that they are walking, and we need to be very careful as to how we make the journey. So this slide, I told you there are only, before we have done this before, these are all ideas from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, where it lays the foundation of the ontological categories in the universe. Yeah. So what are all the things that are out there? So Shvetashvatara Upanishad tells us there are only 3 things in the whole of existence made. What are they? There is the Brahman, there are the Jivas, and then there is the matter. There are only these 3 things that are there in all of existence. Shvetashvatara, of course, categorizes them as Nya, Agnya, and Deva. Okay, so last week we spoke about this Jada or Agnya or matter, which is one of the components of the universe, which our friend Swayambhuva Manu has said this universe, this matter which is created is real. And the sequence in which this creation happens in eternal creation is pretty much the same. What was there in the previous creation is pretty much the same with regards to the principles of creation. You and I may have been there in the previous creation, possibly, or we may not have been. We might have still been in the womb of the Supreme. Only some of us come into creation. So for that itself, we should be grateful to Paramatma. Okay. So the principles remain the same as every creation happens. But then, of course, there is the bigger philosophy of Vedanta, which then talks about, if this universe is there, it is in front of me, is this universe actually real? I.e., is it Sat? Is it an illusion? Is it Asat? Or is it something of an entirely different category, which we cannot actually explain? We just cannot describe it, but it has got a few characteristics that makes it different from Sat, makes it different from Asat. But because Sat and Asat cannot be there simultaneously, there must be a fourth type of thing called Sadasad Vilakshana. Okay, so these are all the ideas of philosophy. The more you ruminate on this, the better you get it. And believe me, it probably will take months and years of constantly thinking about these problems to get some firmed up ideas as to what is it that our acharyas have been talking about. So last week we said Sat means that which is unsublatable. Abhadyam satyam. That which is unsublatable is Sat. Okay. And we said, what is Asat? Asat is something that does not have a space-time correlation. If it does not have a space-time correlation, if something does not exist in that space-time coordinates, it is Asat from a realistic perspective. But the monistic philosophers or the Advaitins or the Mayavadins, what they tell us is an Asat is something that is never an object of perception. That is a definition that they have devised for themselves. So we need to think about this problem. One view is Asat is that which does not have a space-time coordinate, whereas another view of Asat is it is never an object of perception. Okay. Sat na badhyeta, Asat na pratiyeta. Okay, that is it. Those are all the views of Mayavada. So you need to read, Google it, or there are lots of books out there to try and understand as to what is Asat from a monistic school, what is Asat from a realistic school. Both schools accept what Sat is. Sat is that which is unsublatable, no issues. Okay. But then the problem for the Jagat, the problem for the world is, there is a categorization that Jagat is Mithya. And what is that Mithya from a monistic perspective? They label it as something called Sadasad Vilakshana, and we spent a lot of time talking about this last week, so go back and look at those slides. So the essential summary of that is, this snake or a silver on a conch shell, I can perceive it. Okay, I can see the snake now in this PowerPoint slide. I can also see that what appears to be a shining silver on the conch shell on this PowerPoint slide. So I can see it. So it appears to be an object of perception. So it is not Asat. But then it is not Sat because it is sublatable. Because when I go close with a torchlight, I realize that this is a rope. Or when I go and pick up the silver, I realize this is actually a conch shell. So the prior knowledge sublates the previous knowledge. Therefore, it is not Sat. Okay, so that is the argument. So this world must be something different. It is perceivable, but it is also sublatable. But the Sat and Asat cannot simultaneously exist, so it must be something different. Therefore, it is Sadasad Vilakshana, is the ontological category of Jagat. Harish, you got a question?
Yeah, isn't there a concept of whether something is eternal or immutable? And if it's immutable, it's considered Sat, and if not, is that one of the definitions, why this Jagat is considered to be not real, because it changes, it won't be there forever.
Yeah. Okay. So good point, Harish. So we did that briefly last week. When I said space-time, the time can be eternal or it can be present, past, or the future. But that is again a hypothesis that some folks have, that only what is eternal is real, but something that is not eternal cannot be real. No, but from a realistic perspective, something that is eternally present is called Nitya Satya, whereas something that is not eternal is called Anitya. So Nitya and Anitya should never be confused with Satya and Mithya. So these are all the argumentations or the polemics of various schools. So from a realistic perspective, an ant can be real, Brahman can be real, because they all both have some kind of a space-time correlation. Brahman is eternal, but the ant is not eternal. It is anitya. It probably lives for a day or two, and then it loses its body, although the soul is eternal, and that's a different argument. So I think that is where the confusion is. Never confuse. It is not an axiomatic truth to hypothesize and say what is eternal only has to be real, but what is non-eternal should not be real. Who said that? Has any Veda said that? Has Vedavyasa said that? Has any of the rishis or the Upanishads said that? Absolutely not. What is eternal is nitya. What is non-eternal is anitya, but they still have their reality. Brahman is the independent reality, Swatantra Satya, whereas all others are Aswatantra or Paratantra Satya, or they are all under his control, Adhinatvat. Yeah. So that is how the realistic schools view. So they are in the two ends of the spectrum. But I think what we will do as we navigate these slides is we will try and understand why there are these kind of these various views. Okay. So stay with me on this for the rest of this PowerPoint presentation. So hopefully at the end of it, we will get some kind of an overview of what's going on here. So closing that discussion about Nityatva of Jagat, the basic issue there is considering world as Mithya or Sadasat Vilakshana is an unproven hypothesis, period. There is no proof. Philosophers can debate this endlessly, but actually there is no proof that this world is Sadasat Vilakshana. Unfortunately, some philosophers go, flaunting this around, but actually there's no proof. Now here is a bigger problem. If you think this whole universe and the world is Mithya, Vedas are part of this universe. They are part of this world. And then Vedas also become Mithya. They become non-truth declaring. It's a huge problem for some of the monastic thinkers. And I'm not sure whether they've given it full attention, because they have said majority of the Veda is Atattva Vedaka, non-truth declaring. But there are only 4 or 5 lines that are truth declaring Tattva Vedaka. These are all hugely problematic discussions of philosophy. But just because you say that majority of the Vedas are untruth, only a small portion of the truth, does not make it a truth. Yeah, you can have whatever hypothesis you want and you can build your castle, but that does not mean the rest of the Vedic philosophy should accept that. Okay? So those are all the polemics. Okay. So, and also we said last time that I'll come to you in a minute. So, and also we said at that point that ultimately Sadasat Vilakshana or Mithya is actually Asat. Yeah, because this snake here does not have a space-time coordinate. This shell here actually this silver here does not have a space-time correlate. So from all the philosophical thinkers of the rest of the world, anything that does not have a space-time correlative is asat. It's illusion, period. Okay. So one view there is perhaps Sadasat Vilakshana is just a clever re-terming what is asat of Buddhism. So asat of Buddhism is no different from Sadasat Vilakshana. How much ever the Mayavadins can argue this, that is the fundamental position. And if anybody can tell us that Sadasat Vilakshana is different from Asat, I would be very happy to take it. Vedavyasa's position is very clear in Avirodha Adhyaya. He has done one Asad Adhikaranam. Yeah. And he has actually resolved this issue. Our Guru Vedavyasa has resolved this. So we can always use that sutra and then try and rebut it. So Sadas Nitya is Asat. So some folks actually think maybe Mayavada is Buddhism in disguise. There is a view there, out there that exists. And here is a bigger problem. If I say God is great, but his creation is false or Mithya, this concept does not glorify the greatness of God. It only brings it down. Okay, so we need to understand this. This concept does not elevate the greatness of God. Okay? It only brings it down. Okay. And when we celebrate him as Gunapurna Doshadura, And if he is going to be making a mithya world and deceivers, it is a dosha, right? So that is not how other schools of philosophy look at it. Okay, Deval, you had a question.
Sorry, I was just struggling with the concept of an unproven hypothesis because
So
we've done how we get knowledge, and the I don't know, or metaphysical knowledge is by experience. So I'm not 100% sure why any other theory is proven as opposed to this being unproven.
yeah,
So
sure.
I'm a bit confused.
Okay, so that's fine. So what you need to, if I may request, so just go back to last week's slide. So we've kind of discussed about these ideas about, if you want to prove mithyatva of the world, there are only three means of knowledge: pratyaksha, anumana, and agama. You take these three views and then you prove your hypothesis. From a realistic perspective, Deval, it's very, very easy. I don't have to prove anybody. I don't have to prove to anybody this world is real. That is a considered assessment of 7 billion human beings on this world. Okay, consistent experiences, the world is real and the suffering is real. If somebody tells me otherwise, the onus of responsibility lies with that person to actually prove that the world is an illusion. So that is an argument that, of course, we can talk about this for months. So it is from that aspect, if you look at Pratyaksha, Anumana, Agama, there actually is, it's an unproven hypothesis. Yeah, it is just a hypothesis. Says, I'm not saying that, says another school of philosophy. Okay, so we just need to move on. So that is where we were talking about the mithyatva of the world. Then, of course, you've got two other categories in this universe, isn't it? There is the jivas and there are the Brahman. Okay, now let us look at the jivas. What is happening here? The context. Swayambhuva Manu is there. He is a jiva, and in this manvantara, there are lots of other jivas in that manvantara that he's protecting. Not only the material world, but also the jiva rasis that you are protecting. But that is under threat by the asuras, so he is going to God for protection. So by implication, the Isha Upanishad starts by actually establishing the plurality of selves. Yeah, and look at the verses that he has said before. Manaso javiyaha, all these abhimani devatas of the mind cannot reach him. Na ena devaha apnuvan, plural, all the devas cannot reach him. Tad antarasya sarvasya, tad sarvasya bhahyataha. He has said all these bhutis, jivas, he is inside and he is also outside all the jivas. Yastu sarvani bhutani atmanyeva anupashyati sarva bhuteshu cha atmanam tatona vijugupsate. It is talking about plurality of selves. We have done this before in these verses. Swayambhuva Manu is talking about plurality of selves. We jivas, we are here in this samsara. You need to protect us. You need to help us. That is what he's talking. But yet, there is a doctrine of something called upadhi of, say, for example, the monastic schools that actually hypothesize that somehow Brahman himself becomes jivas. Okay. So many folks maybe are not aware of these kind of ideas of monastic philosophy. It's fascinating stuff, but it needs to be dissected out carefully. We just can't accept it and then clap our hands and say, oh, what a great idea, and then get on with it. No, as serious thinkers and philosophers, we need to challenge and critique and then understand what the idea there is. So here is a school of thought which actually thinks that Brahman himself becomes jivas. So in that view, this Swayambhuva Manu is actually Brahman himself. He himself is Nirguna Brahman. Somehow he has become a jiva and he's running around and suffering, doesn't know what to do. Okay? So that is another idea called the doctrine of Upadhi, to hypothesize that Brahman becomes the jivas. So that is a second point that we need to think about, because in the following verses, he's talking about what is Vidya and what is Avidya. And that is why we are doing this kind of analysis. It is not out of context. It is very much within context. Okay. So think about what is the doctrine of Upadhi is. Then, of course, Brahman is another entity here is in this existence, isn't it? Previously, he is, as I told you before, omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, fearlessness, supporter of all, etc., etc. These are all attributes of Brahman. Yet, there is a doctrine which claims Brahman has got no attributes. And some claim he is Saguna. Is he Nirguna or is he Saguna? Does he exist? Is he Nirguna? Is Saguna just an ancillary hypothesis? Does he exists, but his gunas are different from him? So those are all the views that Vedic philosophers has thought about. And that is, as I said, this is the greatness of Sanatana Dharma. All views are welcome. And we do, with our own manana, understand what appeals to us based upon our swabhavas. Okay? So again, there is a doctrine of Maya Upadhi. There is this entity called Maya that envelops Nirguna Brahman. And then he becomes an Ishvara, that is Rama, Krishna, Narasimha, Varaha. All these guys are Ishvaras, but there is one guy called Nirguna. Okay? So those are all the views. So there are, it may appear very confusing, but these are all the strands of thought that flows in Vedic philosophy that we need to do manana. So when our Yajnavalkya said, Atmava are drashtavya, shrotavyo, mantavyo, nitidyasitavyaha maitreyi, that mantavyaha, manana, is what this is about. Okay? So that we get firmed up knowledge, and then as souls, we make our journey. Okay? So now let us look at this concept of upadhi. Okay? So this is a very subtle philosophy, bit complicated. You need to think about this problem for a long time. But I've got a few illustrations, not my own illustrations. These are the illustrations of the monastic thinkers, illustration of Mayavada. So I've taken their own illustration. This is called Abhyugamavada. Okay? Take their own illustration and highlight what are the problems. Okay? Abhyugamavada. Okay? So that's what I'm going to do. So the doctrine of Upadhi in monism, what does that mean? Upadhi, from in a monastic thinker's perspective, is something. It is an entity that somehow separates the finite from the infinite, and then it envelops the finite in ignorance. That is the summary slide. But how does that happen? That's what we need to understand. So Upadhi is something that somehow separates the finite from the infinite and envelops the finite in ignorance. Okay, so let's think about this problem a little bit more. So you got the Brahman, and if there is an avidya upadhi, he becomes the souls. And the same avidya upadhi, he also becomes Swayambhuva Manu. So you and me and Swayambhuva Manu, we are all jivas. But with Maya upadhi, he becomes Yajnanamaka Paramatma, Krishna, Rama, etc. How is this process happening? What is this upadhi all about? Okay. So the monastic thinkers, they come up with an example, a very interesting example, but has got fundamental issues with it, and I'll highlight what it is. You will be familiar with this object, the mirror, and the image. Okay, so the image, the mirror, is the reflector, right? So the object, this fellow is adjusting his tie. And this mirror he's seeing, and then there is an image that is also adjusting the tie. So in this equation, in this extremely superficial example, this object is the Brahman. Okay. This mirror is the Upadhi. The reflection is the Jiva. Okay. No confusion. Object is the Brahman. Mirror is the Upadhi. Image is the Jiva. Okay. Now, let us take a mirror that I had in my house a few years ago. This mirror is cracked. It's got a lot of dust on it, blah, blah, and it is not a perfect mirror. So in that situation, what happens? You have the object. Because the upadhi is not perfect and it has got all sorts of defects and dots of dust and cracks and so on, the image doesn't look great. The image is very distorted. Okay? Those are all the jivas. The dust are the ignorance. Okay? Now, this is that example. So you have the object, which is the Brahman, the mirror, which has got all these dots. The dots only affect the image, and this image is the jiva. Okay, so we just build up that idea. Okay, so the dusty mirror produces distorted images, but the object remains unaffected. Okay, I presume that makes sense. Think about this. The object is unaffected, but the image is affected because the upadhi has got all these defects in it. Okay. Similarly, Brahman or object is omniscient, whereas the jiva, under the influence of upadhi, is enveloped by ignorance, like this image. Destruction of the upadhi, which is the mirror, leads to the destruction of the ignorant jiva, which is the image. Pristine Brahman is left unaffected. Okay, so this is the, in gist, the philosophy of upadhi of monastic thinkers. It sounds very plausible, isn't it? It sounds very interesting. It is plausible. Maybe that is the reason why we are all Brahman, and this jiva is all reflected images of Brahman, and that mirror is so dusty with ignorance that we as images, we are all getting disturbed by this ignorance, and so our image is not great. Whereas the Brahman, who is the object, is pristine. Okay, so that is the view of the monastic thinkers. And here I just need to put a small little, very important statement. When we talk about Mayavada, Advaita, Visishtadvaita, and Dvaita, and so on, this is for philosophical speculation and our journey, of course, but we should only think about the hardcore. I'm talking about hardcore Mayavada. I'm talking about hardcore Advaita Vedanta as it exists. There are many folks who term themselves as Neo-Vedanta. Yeah, Neo-Vedanta in inverted commas, who have come somehow seen the defects in these arguments and come up with some alternative hypothesis in the last 200, 300 years, not even 300 years, in the last 150 years, they have come up with an alternative, slightly twisted explanation, actually dismissing certain core ideas of the original Advaita or Advaita Vedanta. I am not interested in those folks. They can make their own hypothesis. We are talking about hardcore Mayavada. That our acharyas we are talking about, not the Neo-Vedanta of the modern times, which tries to adjust a few ideas to justify the hypothesis. So I just wanted to put that. Think about Vedanta and Neo-Vedanta. I'm not interested. We are not interested in Neo-Vedanta. No Vedic evidence for Neo-Vedanta. We're talking about Vedanta. Okay. So when you take this argument, this is how the original monastic thinkers view and say, that is why you are Brahman. When this object or this ignorance goes, your image goes, and all that remains is the pristine Brahman. And that is how Brahman alone is real, all else are unreal. And it is these various mirrors, these various upadhis that have actually artificially created all these jivas. But actually these jivas don't exist. All that exists is this one pristine image. So for example, you can have one image and you can have 1,000,000 mirrors around him. And when you have 1,000,000 mirrors of various types, you can get various types of images. That is the view. Okay. So let us think about, will this actually pan out for a critical appraisal? Can I actually look at this illustration of our monastic thinkers and see whether it makes sense? Here is the problem. An illustration cannot run on 4 legs. An illustration should prove a hypothesis, okay, and various conditions have to be met. So what are the conditions? Number 1, the mirror must exist in this illustration. The object exists. The light rays from the object pass on to the mirror. It gets reflected, goes through the eyes of a perceiver and to the visual cortex of the brain of the body that perceiver actually carries. And the image or the pratibimba of the object is perceived, and the image also actually is there. Okay. So these are all the various criteria that have to be met. And all these things must actually exist. Okay. This is where the crux of the issue is. Does the mirror actually exist? That is the question in philosophy. For the mirror to reflect, it should have the same degree of reality as the object. You cannot have an imaginary mirror and somehow the imaginary mirror will reflect a real object. Okay. Don't kid me on this. Nowhere can you show me an illusionary or an imaginary mirror and expect a pristine object to be reflected through an illusory mirror. It never happens. That is where the realistic philosophy comes from. Suppose the mirror is unreal and illusory, will it be capable of producing an image? 100% not. This is the problem of Upadhi of monism, say the realistic thinkers. So the rebuttal there is, this is a wrong illustration that you're using to come up to support your hypothesis. Okay. So I leave it to you to decide. So that is just argument number one. If you look at argument number two, this is a fundamental problem. Even Paul Deussen, who is a big Western philosopher who thinks about Vedanta, he asks the question in his work, what is Upadhi? Where is it? What is its origin? There is no answer. Okay, this is a question from Paul Deussen. Google him out, check him out as a Western philosopher who talks a lot about Vedanta. Next question, is this Upadhi real or not? If it is real, then Advaita is gone, because in Advaita there is only one real. You cannot have a second real. You cannot have a second real entity. So that becomes problematic. You cannot even say it is real. If it is real, Advaita is gone forever. There can be only one reality. If the Upadhi is not real, how can it degrade an omniscient Brahman into ignorant finite self? So that is the question. Okay. So for this, the monistic thinkers will say, no. Upadhi is non-real, but this non-real Upadhi produces ignorance. And in addition, it itself is considered a product of ignorance. And then there is the fallacy of what we call as anavastha. Anavastha is regress ad infinitum in Western philosophy. That is called anavastha in Vedic philosophy. Which came first? Ignorance, Upadhi. Did ignorance lead to Upadhi, or Upadhi leads to ignorance? Again, that ignorance leads to Upadhi. Again, that leads to ignorance. Again, that leads to Upadhi, infinity. So you cannot actually establish a cause and an effect kind of relationship. So that's called anavastha dosha. So that is another problem. Or if you say, no, there is only one Upadhi and there is one cosmic ignorance, then there is a fallacy of vicious reciprocity of causality, which is a big Western philosophical words. But our Vedic philosophy very nicely says anyonyashraya dosha. Which came first? Did the chicken come first or the egg came first? You can continuously, eternally argue. So that is what is called anyonyashraya. Then there is the defects of what is called chakraka. Okay, which is like, if ignorance caused Upadhi, Upadhi caused difference, and that difference caused Upadhi, then you go round and round in circles without being able to establish anything. Okay. Here is a bigger problem. If ignorance has a special potency to wield the omniscient Brahman, then what is the origin of this ignorance mate? That is what the realistic philosophers ask. Where did this damn thing come from? This Upadhi, which is so powerful that it can actually envelop Brahman and then make him ignorant. Okay. The real Upadhi of Advaita can never create difference. So at this point, so these are all the directions of philosophical thinking, which I find it fascinating, but we probably need to think months about what is it that they're getting at. So then at this point, a Mayavadin philosopher will say, okay, I see your argument. I will accept Upadhi as real. So there are various problems if you accept that. If the Upadhi is considered as real, and certain schools of Advaita think that real Upadhi of Advaita can never create difference. Okay, this is an amazing philosophical point. I've got a slide coming up next week to show this. So in this view, Upadhi is real. Upadhi is not a product of Ajnana. The difference caused by it is real. However, the difference is only caused by the Upadhi, which is external, not intrinsic to the infinite. And the finite is identical because it's an Aupadhika difference, not a Swabhavika difference. Big words, but you think about it, we don't have time to look at this. But my figure in the next slide will illustrate this point very clearly. You destroy a real Upadhi, difference is gone, only identity remains. Okay. This is a self-contradictory theory. Because if you consider Upadhi is real, number one, your Advaita is gone. And the second point is, a real Upadhi never creates a difference. Okay, these are basic philosophical ideas. Why do I say that? These are all the examples of Mayavada. Okay, very interesting. So in this view, if this prism is the Upadhi and it's real, the monastic philosopher would say, look, I'll give you an example of a prism. If I shed white light on this side, I see Vibgyor, the 7 spectrums of light coming out. So there is only one white light, but 7 different lights are coming out. That is what the Upadhi, the prism, which is the Upadhi, does. If I remove the prism or if I destroy the prism, all that remains is the light. So these fellows are gone. Such is the situation between Brahman and Jivas, and this is the Upadhi. Here is a basic physical question. This is what our acharyas have asked 1,000 years ago. Same question. Okay. And understand, this is where I'm really shocked and amazed at the knowledge of physics that our acharyas have had. The question there is, did prism create different colored lights? No. White light is composed of many colored rays called Vibgyor. Prism only reveals the different light waves that existed already. They already existed in the white light, and this prism only made us aware of the different components of the light that exist in the white light. So your example is flawed. Your illustration that you have taken to prove the plurality of cells as an artificial creation caused by Upadhi falls down. Okay? Interesting example. Another example in this context, another example comes from the monastic thinkers. No, this is like pots. Okay, you have this big akasha. You take a gata, you take what is called as the pot. Each pot has got some space in it. Each pot here has got space. This Upadhi called the pot has actually created a space. So this gata akasha is different from the mata akasha. So that is the mata is it's a big hall, for example, and you have a pot. The big hall is the Brahman. These pots have created these tiny spaces. These are the jivas. Okay. Now you break the pots. What has happened here? All that remains is the space. That is what is the Aikya. These are all jivas. When you break the pot, jivas are gone. All that remains is Brahman. Okay. So that is another example that they take. These are not my examples. These are Mayavada examples to show how the plurality of cells come. How did Nirguna Brahman became Swayambhuva Manu and you and I? That is the question. And they've used this idea of Gata Akasha. Here is the problem. Does the jar create the difference in space in this example? Okay. Basic physics, which some folks have forgotten. Okay. Did the pot create differences in space? Never. Vidyamanasya bedasya nyapako naivakarakaha upadhihi, say the monastic philosophers. So what the idea there is, space has got different components, space is not one, it's got different parts. There are different parts of space. And all that the pot has done is, it has only revealed the difference that pre-existed. The pot there did not create the difference and did not create a space. It only manifested what existed before. Okay, so you have to think about this problem, because once you get the answer, then it is a eureka moment for many of us, because that proves that Brahman can never become the jivas. Why? Upadhis of the physical world reveal differences that already exist. If that is the case, then extending that illustration to Brahman has got serious implications of Advaita. No Mayavada philosopher will ever tell you this, okay? But we can remind them, okay? Because Upadhi only reveals differences that pre-exist, such as the Gata Akasha, Mata Akasha example that has been given. Okay. By using this example, so as I said before, when you use an example to prove a theory, then the example cannot run on 4 legs. It has to actually establish that. So in this equation, The pot only reveals a pre-existing difference. If you take the Brahman as the space, then it means difference exists implicitly in Brahman and Upadhi only reveals it. It's a huge problem, and that is where the crux of this Upadhi issue is. Okay? If you think like Gata Akasha, this Upadhi is creating various jivas, then you have to accept that Brahman has various parts, and these parts only reveal the various parts of Brahman. But no philosopher worth his salt has ever accepted that Brahman has got parts. All of Vedic philosophy accepts Brahma as partless Akhanda Tattva. So when you have this basic dictum of Vedic philosophy, there is no way in which Upadhi could work. If Brahman is one, how can Upadhi split it into parts? This is self-contradictory. So I don't know how much time we have to deal with this, but this is a fascinating topic. So the Mayavadic philosophers at that point would say, what is the harm? Why can't Upadhi just somehow be considered to create difference in space? The difficulty here is twofold. Upadhi has to exist somewhere and should have a spatial configuration. It has to have a space-time configuration. To create a difference, it has to get in touch with space first. It can get in touch with space either in some part of space, or it can contact the totality of space. If you take the first option, Upadhi comes in contact with a part of space, then there is an infinite regress problem. If you're saying there is a part of space, that part of space must have been created prior to Upadhi actually going to that part of space and so on. So that is a anavastha dosha that comes in. Okay? Mayavada philosophers have not thought about these problems, but realistic philosophers have actually questioned this idea. If Upadhi comes in contact with totality of space, two things, both Upadhi and Brahman are coexist. And if there is one Upadhi that envelops the whole of Brahman, Brahman is gone and there is only one soul. Okay, Eka Jiva Vada, which is even worse, because you and I, we don't exist. So the view there is Upadhi therefore cannot create any difference. It can only reveal pre-existing difference. Vidyamanasya bedasya nyapako naiva karakaha Upadhir Drishtapurvohi. So that is the view of the realistic philosophers that tallies very well with what Swayambhuva Manu is saying here. If Swayambhuva Manu does not think that he is Nirguna Brahman, there is no reason why he should do the Ishavasya Upanishad. He can just sit quietly and just get on with it. Okay, here is another bigger problem. Yeah. So eternality of souls is established in the Veda. If removal of Upadhi makes Jiva non-existence, then it is against Vedic philosophy, period. Now, who wants to, can I invite one of us to recite 212, please, which actually establishes the eternality of Jivas. And if you're saying this Gata Akasha, this Gata makes the Jivas, and if the Gata is gone, Jiva is gone and all that remains is Brahman, then that means that Jiva is actually destroyed and only Brahman is there. But that is not what the Vedic view, right? So, Gita chapter 2, 12th verse, who wants to take it up? Pragnesh, go for it.
न त्वेवाहं जातु नासं न त्वं नेमे जनाधिपा न चैव न भविष्यामः सर्वे वयमतः परम्.
Beautiful. So very, very, very categorically Krishna has said, there was never a time I did not exist, there was never a time you did not exist. So how can this Upadhi stuff can destroy and the Jiva is destroyed? I don't know how they can square that circle. Who wants to take up chapter 15, verse 16 to 18? Maybe I can invite Neeta ji to recite that if Neeta is there.
Yeah. Vavimau purushau loke ksharashchakshara evacha ksharas sarvani bhutani kutastokshara uchyate uttamah purushastvanyah paramatmityudakritah yo lokatrayamavishya bibhartyavyaya ishwarah yasmat ksharamati aksharaadapi chottamah atosmi loke vede cha pratitah purushottamah.
Beautiful. Katha Upanishad also says the same thing. Indriyebhyah parahi artha, artebhyashta param manaha, manasastu para buddher, buddher atma mahan paraha. Mahataha param avyaktam avyaktat purusha paraha purushan na param kinchit sakashta saparagatihi. We have done this in Katha Upanishad, where each one talks about an Abhimani Devata. And there is a gradation of Abhimani Devata, says Katha Upanishad. Gita 16 to 18 is the nail on the head to prove the multiplicity of souls. There is one Paramatma and there is the Kutasto Akshara. No, these are all, Niravakasha Shrutis. You cannot, these are all Niravakasha statements. There is no way in which you can interpret this differently. These are all big problematic issues for Mayavada thinkers, and they're conveniently moved away from chapter 15. Let me point that out. They moved away from it because these are all important ideas of philosophy. Look at our Mundaka Upanishad. Yeah, we have done this Dvayumau, Dva Suparna, Sayuja, Sakaya, Samana, Vriksham, Parishashva Jayate, Tayor, Anyaha, Pippalam, Swadati, Anashnan, Anyaha, Abhichakashiti. Look at the last one. And when this bird knows that this Brahman is there, Yada Pashyaha Pashyate, Rukmavaranam, Kartaram, Isham, Purusham, Brahmayonim, Tada Vidwan, Punya Papena Viduya, Niranjanaha, Paramam Samyam Upeti. Okay, Paramam Samyam, not Paramam Aikyam. Okay, again here they have fallen down. They have conveniently twisted the meanings of the statements of Mundaka Upanishad. It only says Paramam Samyam, not Paramam Aikyam, similarity. Chandogya, Sarvaha Prajaha Sata Agamyana Viduhu Sata Agachamaha iti. The rivers go and join the ocean. They do not become the ocean. The water molecules are the rivers are there. The water molecules of the oceans are there. The river goes and joins the ocean. Full stop. That is the philosophy of Uddalaka in Chandogya Upanishad. So how are we going to deny all these truths of the Vedas? So the fundamental and the radical difference between Jiva and Brahman is fundamental. Brahman is Sarvajna, Sarva Shakti, Nitya Sukhi, Swatantra Kartrutva. Jiva like you and me and Swayambhuva Manu, Agnyatva, Alpa Shaktitva, Dukkitva, Swalpa Kartrutva. Basic dictums. Yeah, we need to understand these ideas first. If we don't understand these ideas of what Swayambhuva Manu is saying, because he knows he's got ignorance, otherwise he would be able to protect his Manvantara. He is Alpa Shakti, because if he had full potency, he would be able to protect his Manvantara. He is Dukkitva. Why? Because he is being attacked by Asuras and he is asking refuge with Yajnanamaka Paramatma. Swalpa Kartritva, yes, he can look after this Manvantara, but he cannot protect it fully. He is also looking after it because his Paramatma has given him permission to do this. So he is Swalpa Kartritva. That is what Swayambhuva Manu's view here is. This person called the Jiva can never become Brahman. Certainly according to Isha Upanishad. Okay. So the Upadhi of monism again, unfortunately remains unproven. It assumes Brahman going through samsara and suffering. Okay, this is the problem. If you take Upadhi, then you are saying this Brahman, this Narayana is going through samsara and he's suffering. Again, does this concept actually glorify the greatness of God? I'm sorry, it does not. It only brings this Paramatma down by actually putting him through unnecessary samsara like you and me. Okay? So these are all the issues that the philosophers debate about. So the whole idea of Nirguna Brahman, who is the third component of all of existence. Swayambhuva Manu is given all sorts of qualities, but Nirguna Brahman cannot have any of these attributes. So says the monistic thinkers, and they say Nirguna Brahman somehow becomes Yajnanamaka Paramatma when there is this Maya Upadhi. There is an entity called Maya that superimposes on Brahman. This Maya is ignorance, cosmic ignorance. Shocking stuff. So Maya Upadhi encloses Brahman and he becomes Krishna, Rama, Narasimha, Varaha. Okay. So what does that actually mean? Superimposition of ignorance is required for Nirguna Brahman to become Saguna Brahman and manifest omniscience. Okay. Which does not truly exist in Brahman. Okay, this is what is the core monistic view. If some of our friends are not aware of it, probably we should remind them These are all the implications of you saying you have this Nirguna Brahman on whom there is a superimposition of ignorance called the Maya, and then he becomes Krishna, Rama, and they all become omniscience. So in this very puzzling argument, for somebody to become omniscient, they should first have ignorance. You should have a superimposition of ignorance for somebody to become omniscient. So that is the problem there. Okay, so again, Maya Upadhi is unproven, subjects Brahman to ignorance. Yeah, watch that. Maya, ignorance, subjects, not you and me. The first effect is the superimposition of ignorance on Brahman. Does that concept glorify the greatness of God, or does it actually bring him down? We need to think about this. On the realistic side, what do we say? What is Saguna Brahman and Nirguna Brahman? First, we need to understand what is Brahman. Brahman means what? Atakasmad uchyate brahmeti brihanto asmin hi asmin gunaha. That which is all pervasive in time, space, and gunas is Brahman. First definition. Then you have the prefixes, right? Saguna, Nirguna. Then we need to understand what is that in that context. So when I say Saguna Brahman, I mean he is an abode of infinite non-material attributes. And when I say Nirguna, he has no material attributes. His perfection and attributes are natural to his being. It is not something that is external. Shvetashvatara Upanishad is your evidence. Parasya Shaktir Vividaiva Shruyate Swabhaviki Jnana Bala Kriyacha. There is no external qualities for him. He himself is all these qualities. Okay, he is defectless. He is the highest form of perfection. So sometimes I wonder, when our Vedic philosophy talks so greatly about Brahman, why do monastic thinkers still hold on to that idea of Nirguna Brahman? What is wrong in actually accepting that this Paramatma is an abode of infinite, auspicious, non-material attributes? He does not have any material attributes. What is the big deal? What is the problem? Yeah. We need to ask this, and I've asked this and I've had some answers before. So why is monastic philosophers so determined to hold on to Nirguna Brahman concept, an attributeless inert entity? Here is the answer. Okay, two verses we need to think about here. Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Eko devaha sarva bhuteshu gudaha sarva vyapi sarva bhutantaratma karma adi akshaha sarva bhutadi vasaha sakshi cheto kevalo nirgunashcha. This is one of the evidences they provide, but what they have forgotten is this nirgunashcha is actually got so many qualities that has been qualified with this. He is omniscient, he is oneness, he is divinity, he is transcendence, he is immanence, he is omniscience, are all qualities. And that concluded in Upasamhara as Nirguna. So though the Nirguna has to be taken in context and understood that these are all non-material concepts. Here is a bigger problem for Advaita, and they have not forgotten, they've forgotten about this. Taittiriya Upanishad. Om Brahma Vedapnoti Param Tadesha Abhyukta Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. Not Nirguna Brahma, not Saguna Brahma. It's not what the Taittiriya Rishi has said. He said, Satyam Jnanam Anantam. That is the definition of Brahman. Satyatva, Jnanatva, Anantatva. They are all qualities. Okay? They are qualities. No doubts about this. So the Shruti has actually qualified this Brahman that this is got Satyatva, this is Jnanatva, this is Anantatva. How are you going to square that circle? So our friends in the monastic philosophy have got a clever way of looking at this. That is certainly what Madhusudana Saraswati does in his Advaita Siddhi. Atad Vyavriti is another technique that they appoint. So what that means is Atad Vyavriti is elimination of the opposites of the quality named. Okay, so what they've said is you need to talk to them as to how they make these kind of interpretations. I just find it funny. When the Veda says Satyam, what they mean is absence of falsity. When the Veda says Jnanam, apparently what it means is absence of ignorance. And when the Veda says Anantam, what it apparently means is absence of non-Anantam, double negatives. So all these kinds of twisting the language, which some of the folks in that school are very good at. But the bottom line there is, as Vyasatirtha points out, even this Atad Vyavriti are attributes of Brahman. if he does not have falsity, that is also an attribute. Yeah. So these are all the polemics. So again, nirgunatva of monism is unproven. You may claim, but actually there is no proof. It brings down the greatness of God and makes him an inert, zero, useless entity. I sometimes feel sorry that why our monastic thinkers are not thinking along these directions, that they are actually bringing down the greatness of God by labeling him as you are a useless zero entity man. The concept of nirgunatva from a monastic perspective, realistic schools are different. But from a monastic perspective, again, it does not glorify the greatness of God. It only brings it down. Then there are all these big problems of substance and attributes. I've just put this idea, you do your research. There is a whole lot of Vedic philosophy of substances and their attributes and what is the relationship between them. That is an entirely different discussion, but it is relevant in this topic. So then the question I have put here, which, again, not my question, the realistic philosophers ask is there any difference between Nirguna Brahman of Advaita and Shunya of Buddhism? Okay. Something for us to think about. So I hope in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to wind up giving you an overview of what is going on here. Because over the last 2 sessions, we have looked at all these various views of Brahman, Jiva and Jada. Because Shvetashvatara Upanishad says there are only these ideas in Vedic philosophy. There are diverse views. And this is the democracy in Vedic philosophy. Yeah. Nobody picks up arms and kill each other. We debate and we question these ideas and we try and find out the truth. And in that process, we as journey of souls make our spiritual and philosophical progression. Spirituality without philosophy does not exist. And philosophy without spirituality is a complete waste of time. So if you have spirituality, that has to be with philosophy. If you just have blind spirituality, faith, it doesn't take us anywhere, which is what Swayambhuva Manu is getting at in the very next verse. Okay. So what is it that we have discussed? There are these 3 entities. Some folks think Brahman doesn't exist, Chetanas, Jivas doesn't exist, all that exists is matter. That is all of us, Charvakas. Some folks think the other way. Jiva doesn't exist, Jadas don't exist, only Brahman exists. Mayavada. Some folks think Brahman doesn't exist, only Jiva and matter exist. Jainism. Some folks think Brahman does not exist, Jivas does not exist, matter does not exist. Buddhist philosophy. Some folks think all 3 are independent categories, Brahman, Jiva, matter. Sankhya and Nyaya philosophy. Vaiseshika philosophy. Some folks think Jiva and matter form the body of Brahman. Visishtadvaita Vedanta. Some folks think Jiva and matter are always dependent on Brahman and different from each other. Tattvavada, Dvaita philosophy. Okay, so these are all the various philosophies, the democracy in philosophy that exists in Vedic Sanatana Dharma that we have to go and explore. Sadly, we are not. I think probably because A, we run very busy lives, and B, maybe the access to the core Sanskrit texts are not available, or it is only in certain circles. I think it is our duty to tell this to others. That is what Swayambhuva Manu is going to say in the next verse. And that is the reason why I'm introducing these ideas. It is not enough just to have the knowledge. It is very important to censure wrong knowledge, but at the same time, distribute the right knowledge. They are all core duties of folks. That is what Swayambhuva Manu says in the subsequent verses. But that does not mean that we need to really bring people down and have major conflicts. No, because the same Shrutis tell us, Anadi kalato vrittaha samayahi pravahataha nacha uchchedo asti kasyapi samayasyeti ato vibhuhu. Okay, that all these philosophies always existed in creation, not just in this creation, but also in previous creation and all the future creations to come. All these philosophies are going to be there. Each jiva, based on its swabhava, it makes a decision that this appeals to it, and it makes a journey that gives its destination. Brahman makes sure that these philosophies exist so that each jiva makes an attempt to make that progress. But the same scripture tells us Badarayana, Vedavyasa, Krishna Dvaipayana, our master, our father of the Vedantic school of philosophy, has written Brahma Sutra so that souls can actually read and then dissect these ideas and make their own destination. And how has he done it? The first adhyaya of Brahma Sutra, Pratama Adhyaya, is called Samanvaya Adhyaya, where what Vedavyasa establishes, that is, everywhere in the Vedas, they always glorify Brahman. Sarva Gunapurnatva, Dosha Duratva. That is what the Samanvaya Adhyaya is. Dvitiya Adhyaya is called Aviroda Adhyaya. Aviroda Adhyaya means what are all the contradictory views or the opposite views that refute the idea of Brahman as the creator of the universe. That there are other folks who are the creators of the universe, etc., etc. All these are addressed in the Aviroda Adhyaya of Brahma Sutra. Please check it out. It's got 4 padas. The second pada is called Samaya Pada, where Vedavyasa actually goes to all the ideas that I've told you so far, Buddhist philosophy, Jain philosophy, etc., etc., and he dissects the pros and cons of this. That tells you 2 things. Number one, even in Vedavyasa's time, these ideas were always there. Okay, it is not something that has happened in the 6th century or in the 10th century or in the 12th century. These ideas have always been there, and the great Hindu civilization or the Vedic civilization has always thought about these bigger problems. When the rest of the world were cavemen or hunter-gatherers, we were thinking about these big philosophical issues 5,000, 6,000 years ago. Okay, so that is how I see it. Of, Badarayana addresses it. There is an Adhikaranam, as I said, Asad Adhikaranam. Check it out. Amazing Adhikaranam that talks about the reality, illusoriness of the universe by our founding father. So can I call upon one of you to actually take up verse 241, please? Jagdish, go for it.
Yes. व्यवसायात्मिका बुद्धिः एकेह कुरु नन्दन बहुशाखा ह्यनन्ताश्च बुद्धयो व्यवसायिनाम्.
Beautifully recited, beautifully recited. So this is what Krishna said. Vyavasayatmika buddhihi. Engage your intellect. Read the scriptures in the right spirit. Don't accept dogmas as gospels or truths. Go and investigate, critique it, and so on. That is what Krishna has said. And when you do that, you will realize truth is only one. There may be so many these views, but there is only one among this that is correct. Multiple choice question, there is only one. But when you do that Vyavasaya, you will find out what the truth is. So I had to do all this to come to this section. I'm really pleased I'm here because it is a complicated ideas to discuss. So proper upasana of Brahman is essential. And this is with this contemplation, he's praying to Yajnanamaka Paramatma, because the context is important, isn't it? Here is a situation where this Hiranyaksha is moving earth out of its orbit and Varaha is coming and saving it. But then the Asuras think we are not able to destroy this Manvantara because Varaha is saving this Manvantara again and again. Why don't we just go and tackle this Swayambhuva Manu himself and knock him off? And at that point, Swayambhuva Manu runs to Yajnanamaka Paramatma, who is his grandson, and that he prays to him. That is the context, right? And he needs to pray in the right context. Number one, he should exist. This Manvantara should exist. And this Brahman should actually be the same guy, not some Maya, Upadhi, Sabala Brahman who actually does not exist. So all these contexts are important for us to do that Anusandhana so that we approach it properly. So with all this in the background, what Swayambhuva Manu is now saying, and we will deal with this in the next class because I don't think we have time to look at the first couple of words. So he's got 6 verses that are coming up. These are beautiful, beautiful verses. And so if you have the wrong upasana of Brahman, what are the consequences? And then he also says, how should our upasana be? What should be our ethics and morality of life? How should we run our lives with regards to the right knowledge that we have, and how do we distribute it to folks? Those are all the core ideas of Swayambhuva Manu. He says, Andantamaha pravishanti ye avidyayam upasate tato bhuya ivate tamo yavu vidyayam rataha. Anyad eva ahur avidyaya, anyad eva ahur vidyaya, anyad ahuhur avidyaya. Iti shushrumadhiranam yena tad vichachakshire. Vidyam cha avidyam cha yastad veda ubayam saha. Avidyaya mrityum tirtva vidyaya amrutam ashnute. Andantamaha pravishanti ye asambhutim upasate. Tato bhuya ivate tamo yavu sambhutyam rataha. Anyadeva ahuhu sambhavat. Anyad ahuhur asambhavat. Iti shushrumadhiranam yenas tad vichachakshire. Sambhutim cha vinasham cha yastad veda ubayam saha. Vinashena mrityum tirtva sambhutya amrutam ashnute. Beautiful 6 verses. The language is very clear, but what is puzzling is, what is this vidya? What is avidya? What is sambhuti? What is asambhuti? The first 3 verses actually explain what is sambhuti and asambhuti. When I say vidya, what does that mean? Vidya equals sambhuti, avidya equals asambhuti, and all that kind of relations that we will try and dissect it out in all its glory. Okay, so that is what Swayambhu or Manu is talking about. So I hope you found the last 2 sessions interesting. That gives you a framework in which how we understand what is right knowledge and what is not right knowledge, and how we need to make our own journey of souls. So I'm going to leave it off at that. Krishna Pranamastu. And if we have any questions, we can take it up. Okay, so looks like we have no questions. In that case, Harish, can you take us through Om and we'll close today's session? If Harish is not there, can I invite, let's get Sushruji to do that for us today, please? Excellent. Thank you very much. And next week, important announcements to make. We have a fascinating session, Gita Chintana, chapter 18, part A, verse 1 to 28. Led by Suresh Kankanwadi ji and his team, which is as usual multi-continental. We have folks from India, folks from UK, folks from the US, all contributing to what promises to be a very, very interactive session. Our expert Pragnesh ji is also doing quiz. So it's going to be fun next Sunday. So please join us next Sunday for Chintana of chapter 18, which, as you know, is a summary of Bhagavad Gita. And then after that, we'll make our onward journey on to the 3rd Kanda of Ishavasya Upanishad. Okay, so take care, guys. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.